If you're trying to get traffic on Etsy and you're relying on SEO, well, I need you to watch this video. My business partner, Chris Schaefer, is going to break down what it looks like now moving forward. So this way here, you have the best chance to leverage SEO on Etsy because it's not the way it used to be. Things are changing, but the good news is if you follow what Chris is going to share with you, you have a much greater chance of succeeding. So watch the video.
I want to address kind of the elephant in the room. And the concern that I have, and I think the reason most sellers get this wrong, is they hear the phrase SEO and then they see that paired with algorithm. And they go, all I have to do is trick the computer. Well, okay, yes, right? But this isn't 1994. It's not quite that simple, right? And so the better way of thinking about this is rather than thinking of any algorithm as an evil Terminator robot, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger style, coming back in time to destroy our success on Etsy. The way that we should be thinking about this is that algorithm is trying to figure out what people want. Because the job of Etsy search, like any search algorithm, is to show you what you want. How does somebody define that? Well, it depends on the search engine. Somebody like Google, a win for Google and something that would indicate that someone wants your content on Google is that they go to Google, they type in something, they click on the link, they go to your website, and they don't come back to Google for a search related to that. If they bounce back right away, Google says, that website didn't fully answer their question. So maybe we drop them down. Etsy doesn't want people to leave Etsy, right? The win for Etsy is that when somebody searches, they then end up buying that product. And the fewer clicks in between that initial search and the purchase, the better off we are. And Etsy talks about this in their documentation, Scott. They talk about a variety of different things. And there's really two main buckets that the algorithm looks at on Etsy. The first is basically whether or not they should even consider you to be shown. And we've referred to this in the past as like that swipe left, swipe right, Tinder type test. It's binary. Either you qualify or you don't. And that's where the keyword side of this comes in. And I know I said a couple minutes ago that keywords are not the most important thing. And I know there's a bunch of people saying, Chris, if keywords aren't the most important thing, but it's the first thing that Etsy looks at, well, then why aren't they the most important thing? The reason they're not the most important thing is most Etsy sellers, and Scott, I think you would agree with me on this, don't really understand the difference in long tail, short tail, fat head, right? They don't understand that Etsy, and they say this in their documentation, basically looks at your entire listing, your title, your tags, your descriptions, and they don't look at it as a giant block. They don't look at it as phrases. They look at it as individual words. And so if we have the words bass, fishing, and t-shirt anywhere in those listings, or synonyms, so shirt, bass, trout, right? We could potentially even qualify. Now, trout and bass, not a very close synonym because they're not actually synonyms, right? But fish, fishes, bass, swimmy thing, t-shirt, right? Any of the other ways that we could describe that. Etsy has a really in-depth understanding of how English works. They understand different combinations of words. They understand synonyms. They understand antonyms. They understand misspellings, and they understand variations on the same word. So you could list out a bunch of different shades of blue, and as long as they are a shade of blue that is like a commonly used word, Etsy will associate that with blue, and you therefore pass the first part of that test. As long as you have a word similar to the words that are being used in the search, you start to pass that test. So having every different variation of bass fishing t-shirt, bass fishing t-shirt for this person, bass fishing shirt, fish shirt. We don't have to have all of those different combinations in the listing. And that's why I said a couple minutes ago that keywords are not the thing that are the most important. Now, with that in mind, there are a couple things that we want to pay attention to. One, we should still be doing a little bit of keyword research. We should be looking at competitive listings before we create our listing and see which keywords are driving traffic and sales to them and incorporate those in our listing. But until we start getting that data back from Etsy, be it through their beta analytics search report or through the Etsy ads that tell us which keywords are and aren't leading to sales, there's not much point in really fussing around with all of the different ways that we could squeeze all of these things in. Rather, what we should focus on is the second part of the algorithm, which is, in my opinion, it's got 90 to 95% of this, which is what they refer to as the shop score or the Etsy rank, right? And that is made up of a few different parts. The first is going to be our listing quality score, which essentially tells us how likely someone is to purchase that product, right? So they're looking at how many people came to the listing, how often is it sold, what are people's opinions of the products, all of these kinds of things. They also look at a few other things in here like recency, and this is where we get the myth that if we just constantly renew our listing, that will come up to the top. And if you read through Etsy's documentation, they say, actually don't do that because you eat into the shop score. If you don't, and the listing quality score, if you don't have a listing quality score because your listing is brand new with no traffic, that's when they start to look at recency to try to give you a chance. But realistically, the most important thing here is going to be the shopper behavior, meaning their past behavior, which we don't have control over, with the exception, Scott, something you and I talk about all the time, which is focusing on one single niche. So it makes Etsy's job of finding people who might like our stuff even easier because they say, hey, every time Scott logs on to Etsy, he buys fishing related stuff. Let us show him the shop, not just the listing, but the listing from the shop that has a ton of fishing related stuff. That'll up our chances that Scott buys something when he searches for that fishing t-shirt. And then the big one is what you alluded to and said directly a few minutes ago, Scott, which is sales. If somebody comes to that listing, how likely are they to turn into a sale? So if we focus on doing a little bit of keyword research up front, that gets us past that first test. Then our only job to optimize for the SEO algorithm, which is really just trying to find the behavior that they're looking for, right? Trying to find the product that somebody's going to buy. We have to focus on the listing itself. And the way that we do that is by looking at the different sections of the listing and see how that influences the only thing that really matters, which is that conversion rate. Out of 100 people who come to the listing, how many people buy? So rather than sitting around and tweaking all of these little things, all of the different keyword placements, our job, if we want to truly optimize for SEO, should be to look at the things that impact conversion rate the most. Is our title keyword inclusive, but more importantly, human readable? Is our description covering all of the areas that it should be covering? Are we talking about how to care for it? Are we addressing common objections that somebody might have because they can't physically pick up the product, hold it, flip it around? Are we talking about not just the bullet points of what the product is made of or from, but why that matters to the end customer? And then the other, and I would argue even more important thing that we should be focusing on inside the listing itself, and it's something that most Etsy sellers ignore beyond when they publish the listing, is that images section. And so rather than focusing on tweaking keywords and doing all of those kinds of things, 2024 and beyond, if you want to get the most out of every listing that you have, you should be focusing on the description and the images and trying to increase the conversion rate that you have as much as possible. And that will naturally start to get you shown higher for the obvious keywords and some of the less obvious keywords that are combinations.
So there you go. It's pretty simple, but you do need to follow the framework that Chris just outlined. Now, one of the things that Chris talked about was increasing your conversion rates. And one way of doing that is increasing your reviews. But that's another area where sellers are struggling to get reviews. So that's why I shot this video right here that shows you a new strategy for getting reviews in 2024. Watch that video next, and I'll see you there.